Hello and welcome to tonight's Truth Proof live stream. So I've got to welcome everybody from the UK and around the world. And yes, it's that time of year, holiday time, Christmas time. So I hope you're all prepared for that and got all the shopping in and everything you need. Things like that. So I've got to welcome everybody onto the chat, and I've got to thank everybody for coming on tonight because I know you're all so busy. So I'll just give a shout out to a few names as soon as it gives me access to them. So let's have a look who's on tonight. Yeah, well, of course, Skyflower's doing the moderating tonight, so please be courteous and kind to everybody in the chat. We have Lisa Odd, Stephen Giles, Kim King, Alison Buttle, Stargazer Eternal, and let's see some new ones coming tonight. Jane Louise Bowery's in, and welcome to the show, Jane. Let's see if I can find any new names on there. Did I say Terry Brown, Adam Sander, and Andy Ross, Ghost Whisperer, Stockholm Pearls and Views. Tino's on tonight. Welcome, Tino. And the Disabled Welshman, Corey, is in the house tonight. I've got to welcome everybody for coming on tonight's live stream. We've got a great guest on tonight, so I will let Paul just take it away. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much, Les, and great to be here. Last one of the year. We'll be doing the next ones, 2023. Hope you all going to follow through with that for us. It's great to have your support. And tonight we're speaking to a guest who's been on before and is an absolute wealth of knowledge. Last time Preston Dennett was on, he'd written 28 books, and it's probably not 6 or 8 months ago, and we're now up to 30 books. Prolific writer, researcher, but not just from behind a keyboard. This guy is boots on the ground, face-to-face witnesses, everything that you could want in an absolute world-class researcher, respected with whoever you talk to within the field. So Preston, great to have you on Truth Proof. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Les.
You're welcome. And what's been happening in last year? What projects have you been involved in?
Oh, I'm always interviewing new people. You know, I did a couple of TV appearances. We'll see if they pan out. You never know. Put out 2 new books. One is called Symmetry, a True UFO Adventure. Pretty excited about that one. That's all about one person who's had lifelong encounters with ETs. What I like about her case is it's the most extensive case of extraterrestrial contact, really, that I've ever had the privilege to research. All about a lady by the name of Dolly Safran. She's had fully conscious encounters since age 14. By that I mean no hypnosis, no hypnotic regression. She fully remembers it and has no fear surrounding her encounters. It's really quite an amazing story. And that's doing really well. So I've been working with that, and also just put out a book, which is one in a series of volumes, actually. This is what I call the Not From Here series. I put out volume 4, and it's about the more unusual sort of outlying cases of UFO contact. And it's funny, you mentioned, Paul, like, because UFOs are already unusual, but no, I'm telling you, these are even more unusual. These are the cases that really don't fit the standard model of contact, perhaps, or just bizarre, unique aspects that haven't got a lot of attention. Having a lot of fun with that. So,
well, Preston, you know, I'd love to talk about a few of those cases, but first, let's, if you don't mind, let's stay with symmetry, and just if we're good to talk about this lady's lifelong experiences and just delve into that a little bit. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I adore Dolly. She's such an amazing witness. She reached out to me through the internet several years ago, 6 or so, when she decided to go public. She had kept her experiences pretty much completely private, told only a few family members and friends. And she fits the typical profile I see with contactees. From a very young age, she had experiences. In fact, she recalls all the way back to before she was a year old when she had her first experience. She recalls the room filling with light, and she's pulled up out of her crib. And I know this may sound unusual, but contactees, as a general rule, have really good memories, reaching back to very early childhood. When she was 2 years old, she was missing from her house for a couple of hours. The family freaked out. Her parents could not find her, not in the house, not in the yard. They ended up calling the police, and they found her 7 miles from the house at the local convenience store. There's no way she could have gotten there on her own. So all kinds of weird stuff was happening. They, of course, bought double locks for the doors and windows, bought guard dogs, did everything they could to stop her from disappearing. But it didn't work. She had an amazing experience at age 6, where a craft came down and pulled her on board. There was a gray ET, what we now know are grays, and basically introduced herself to Dolly. This was a female gray, tall, 6.5 feet or so. And Dolly's like, "Who are you?" You know, being just a little kid, she had no really conception of someone being a little different looking.
Right.
This lady did have very large eyes and, you know, a largish head, bald, and said, "You can call me Mama, and we're going to be working with you," and basically just introduced herself. But it wasn't until age 14, after having several experiences with missing time and close-up UFO sightings, that Dolly became concerned, like, am I going crazy? What's going on? And she had this experience when in 1973, age 14, she was out in her home in the Florida Everglades and staying up late, watching the sky with a telescope. And suddenly her dad says, "Come inside, it's a school night, you got to go to bed." Dolly went into her bedroom and doesn't sleep much, like a lot of contactees. She really just needs a couple of hours of sleep. So she's just staring out the window when she notices there's hundreds, or like 50 or 100 star-like objects moving around. And they're not stars. She can see this. They're pairing off. They're shooting off in different directions, moving at right angles. And 2 of them drop down in her area and get real low. One moves off to the east towards the Kendall area in Kendall, Florida. And one comes right over her house. And it's right over the trees, right over the backyard. And you can see now it's a metallic craft. There's portholes, and she can see, looking through the portholes at her, are two gray ETs. Large eyes, huge heads, grayish skin. And she freaks out, dives under her bed, and the whole room fills with light. Next thing she knows, it's morning. And she's waking up, and she's actually wearing someone else's pajamas, not hers. And they're on outside, inside out and backwards. So this was the first time she had real, honest to God physical proof that, she was not crazy. And long story short, she remembers being taken on board, meeting with Mama, the tall gray, these shorter grays, the craft itself, who is intelligent and alive. And it's a long experience, and we can get into it if you'd like.
Yeah. Did she talk about seeing other people who'd been abducted? I hear you say there's between 50 and 100 objects that she can see, so presumably they're not all there for her. So
correct. Yeah, this was a mass event, so to speak. 1973 was a big year for UFOs. If you look into it, there was quite a few experiences that occurred on that year. And later, as an adult, oh yeah, she would see many people on board. She was
right.
Following this experience, she started having fully conscious experiences 2-3 times a week. She was being pulled on board and taught and learned all kinds of things. So
and what has she got any, I wouldn't say evidence, but has she got any other family members that kind of back up that she's I know you said they put locks on the doors, triple locks, to try and stop her disappearing, but were they fully aware of what the extent of what was happening, or didn't they know until years later?
oh no, they were fully aware. Both her parents, for sure. Her brother was quite a bit younger when it was all going on, but every single one of them witnessed something at some point, as did her friends and neighbors. Yeah, she's got many corroborating witnesses, including myself now.
Yeah.
And yes, has been able to capture photographs, for sure, photographs and moving films. So yeah, 100%. She's got medical evidence, has been healed, has seen other people when she's on board. That's kind of one of the things she does working with the Greys, is she's on board when they scoop people up and physically examine them. She's there to sort of orient them, help calm them down, and let them know, you're not going to be hurt. Everything's fine. This is just a little medical checkup.
That's, I was going to say, what's her role? Because she, to be involved to such a great extent, but is this the role? She's there to liaise with. Yeah.
That's definitely one of her main roles, because when people see Greys and they're on board and they're being physically examined, they often do have a very strong fear reaction, fight or flight. People will freak out. She says 90% of people really have a hard time with this. Not always. She said when they bring up kids, sometimes are overjoyed, and other people who suddenly remember contact and are like, "Oh, yay! I'm so glad you've come. Let's go.
So,
this is fun."
How does she rationalize then the different experiences that people report? Because it's probably same intelligence as the same beings. I don't mean the ones that she saw, but the same type of beings that are interacting and abducting people all over the world. And some people have horrific experiences, and others, like Dolly, sound like she's having quite a good experience. What's her thoughts on that? Or has she given any?
Yeah. Oh, certainly. Yeah. She can definitely elaborate on this probably better than I could. But before I even met her, I'd sort of reversed my opinions. I thought that this was in some ways a negative experience for people. But I came to realize, no, the ETs are not trying to hurt anyone. That is not their agenda at all. I have pretty much zero accounts of what I would call outright sadism, or them trying to hurt or scare people. And in fact, people are being pulled on board largely. It is for healing purposes, or guiding, or teaching, or waking people up. And this is when she contacted me. And she has pretty much the same opinion I do about all this, that the problem is there is a very fear-based media. We're trained to fear anything that looks different. You know, we are very frightened as a general rule. People's lives are guided by fear to a certain extent. So when someone has this experience, often the reaction is outright terror, complete fear. And this causes people to not only not perceive the experience correctly, but to automatically assume this is evil and bad for them. And often
well, you know, me personally, because I've had experiences from childhood, and I'm going to probably say opposite to what this lady's experienced, because everything I experienced was absolute fear. And unless whatever they did to me was for my own good, I can't see anything good in what happened. And I'm not discounting this lady's experience at all, but that's just my take on it. I mean, I've been talking to somebody today about this, and because he's been trying to obtain medical records, this guy, or he's going to do, and I'd got mine, and you know, and medical records are saying things like, the doctors are saying, we're perplexed by the punch hole lesions that are appearing on this man's body every 3 to 6 months. I never said at the time what I knew what were happening, and to me there was nothing good in what was happening. That's not to knock anything you're saying, Preston, at all. It's just that I've not come away with that experience, and I'd like to speak to you afterwards, not tonight, but at another point about this, to be honest with you. But
yeah,
unless you've something else to go on, sorry.
Yeah, I totally understand and sympathize. You're not alone with that. A lot of people do feel that this was a negative experience for them.
Yeah.
And what happens often, I find, is people will continue to have experiences, and at some point, they're like, well, I'm still here, I'm fine.
Yeah.
And they start to remember more of it. And this is when they start to
Yeah.
remember the good stuff, because the human mind has a tendency to deal with the trauma first. And so we have to get through all of that before we can get to the good stuff. 'Cause the good stuff does happen, I assure you.
Preston, you touched on that you'd got your own corroboration. Have you had some kind of experience whilst you've been documenting this lady's story?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've not only interviewed people who, you know, corroborate her story. You know, she's with people when she's filming this stuff and having encounters. And I met her face to face for the first time when at the Laughlin UFO MegaCon. This was last year in Nevada. And we had decided we weren't going to stay in the hotel of the convention itself, but rent a little Airbnb, which was some miles outside of Laughlin. And that's what we did. She arrived the day before. And the day before I got there, she did have a UFO come down. Her friend Yvonne was there. They filmed it. It actually got into the evening news, which I did see. That was really interesting confirmation. But yeah, the day I arrived, we went out and we saw some stuff in the sky that I cannot identify. And I've since been around her when weird psychic events happen of all kinds, poltergeist-like activity, you know, telekinetic stuff, disappearing objects. We've had some very intense, I'll call them, quote, UFO dreams. I don't think they are. So yeah, it's definitely ramped up my own experiences, which I've already been having prior to meeting her, I will say.
And do you think that the poltergeist type experiences and the other paranormal experiences that happen in conjunction with what's happening to her, we know are a result or a direct result of this interaction, or has she got some kind of raised perception and that these things happen around this lady?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. What happens is when someone has these experiences, I'd say it sort of elevates their awareness, and they do become aware of ghosts and stuff like this, but it moves beyond that. There's a bit of a psychic transformation, a spiritual transformation that takes place. So people, as a general rule, will start having a variety of paranormal events, and will start experiencing levitation, even telekinesis, all kinds of activity. It's like their bioelectric field has been activated to a certain degree. And they will, for example, start blowing out light bulbs and computers and watches and all kinds of things like this. So yeah, all kinds of activities will occur.
Just before we came on air, we talked briefly about historic UFO cases. And you've got knowledge of quite a few of them as well. So how far back can we go with some of these cases, Preston?
Yeah.
And sorry, before you start, I do urge people, please, questions in capitals, and last show at year, let's get some interaction with the audience and ask Preston some questions. I know Sky's already asked and Les has, so yeah, let's do it. Thank you. Preston, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. I think the farther back you go, the more interesting things you find, because you can go back just a few, decades, and you'll see interesting accounts of what was usually interpreted as astronomical or religious events throughout the 1800s. But you can go farther back into Renaissance times, and you will see the evidence of ETs for sure, in terms of paintings showing disc-like objects with portholes and figures looking out and beams coming down. There's quite a few examples. You can go back to the Middle Ages, and there are several cases of very distinct wood carvings, which show various types of objects in the sky, classic saucers, cigar-shaped craft, spheres, all kinds of stuff. And the further back you go, the more stuff you find. I mean, in Roman times, there are writings of these objects in the sky. They called them flying shields. So I think there's a tendency for each culture to interpret these events in the milieu, I guess, of their culture, their belief system, their baseline of knowledge.
And we did touch on that earlier, didn't we? Because some cultures will put a religious slant on the sightings, which is no bad thing. It's just the way that they're conditioned, the way that they're educated to look at these things. Whereas America, the UK, we're looking up into the sky and we're thinking extraterrestrials, but ultimately it's the same thing, I think, that we're all looking at. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think, this might be egocentric to say, but I think we do have a handle on what's actually happening now. I think we are dealing with extraterrestrials visiting us from other planets, people like us, biological beings, and that we are correctly interpreting a lot of this phenomena, whereas throughout history, perhaps not so much, but they were definitely aware of things going on. I think some cultures absolutely were. There are indigenous cultures throughout the world who have oral traditions talking about people coming from the sky gods, sky people, call them what you will, coming down and teaching agriculture and medicine and all kinds of stuff like this. And I think those cultures did have a pretty clear interpretation of what was going on. But you can look at petroglyphs, cave paintings, pre-Columbian artifacts. In fact, if you look at the writings of ancient India, they talk about Vimyana, flying ships, which are absolutely identical to what we would call flying saucers today. Hieroglyphs in ancient Egypt as well. The city of Sumer talks about beings coming down and teaching culture. And that's often considered one of the first modern civilizations. So yeah, there's clear evidence that there is extraterrestrial visitations going on for thousands of years, millennia.
And obviously we're getting visitation now, but what do you think the result would be if the main players, the governments of the world, came out? And we know that they've given us little drips of information, but my own opinion is they've only given us what we're driving for. Think maybe we've got to tell the public something, and just enough just a tantalizing bit. I don't think it's a deception. I just don't think they want us to know. But what do you think would happen if we were told the true extent of what is visiting us? What do you think public reaction would be?
I think it would be positive. I don't think people would panic or anything. I think it would be a big adjustment for people who are diehard skeptics, or it would definitely have an effect on, economics, religion, science, all of culture would take a severe shaking up for sure. But I don't think that it would be the end of humanity by any means. I think it would be a huge age of enlightenment. This is my opinion, but I think that our governments have been trying to cover this up for a very long time, 80, 90 years at least, in an attempt to basically retain control over humanity, retain control over their wealth. So there is a cover-up. It's demonstrable. This is not speculation. I don't think it's in our best interests. I think the only reason we're seeing disclosure to any level now is because if our governments don't disclose, they will lose control of the narrative. They will lose credibility. It's clear. I mean, there's enough evidence now to say that this is a real phenomena. And if they don't disclose, they're no longer relevant. No one will believe them. So I think they're not doing it for our good, but for theirs, to retain control of their power and their control of the narrative.
So we've got all the different countries around the world, and as you know, that all we seem to want to do as a species is fight and attack other countries, and not us necessarily, but that's the basis of what's happening. I wonder what other countries would view it, how America would view it, and the United Kingdom, if some extraterrestrial visitation took place, but it liaised and became friendly with a country that we're not friends with. I mean, it must be a massive kind of worry. Could that be why there's so much secrecy? Because if there is any contact, you'd want to keep your cards close, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and what's interesting about what you're saying is that we see here as researchers that UFO contact is absolutely global. It's not confined to one country. They are visiting everybody. So I don't think that's a danger so much for humanity. I think governments around the world, the major governments, do have the proof. They have the craft. They have the bodies. And at some point, there probably will be one of them who disclosed this. We do have this technology. According to several researchers, this is not really my area of expertise, but it seems clear that there is a level of cooperation between the major world governments on covering this up. So
you say, Preston, they have the proof, and I know you've already said it's not your area of expertise, so we don't have to delve deep into it, but what are your views on Roswell?
Roswell. Yeah, I love Roswell. I know some people say, it's quit beating this dead horse. Like, no, wait a second. This is a monumental case. It's probably the most famous in the world. This occurred in 1947, of course, July, when a craft allegedly crashed in New Mexico, outside of the city of Roswell. And if you look into it, it's probably more than just 1, 2, 3, perhaps more. And this is very well verified. Pretty much, researchers have interviewed several hundred witnesses. There's about 100 books on this case. Not kidding. I have 10 or 20 of them. But researchers have interviewed the people who actually saw this craft coming down, people who were in the radar stations and saw it on radar scopes, people who saw this thing actually crash, people who found the wreckage, the people who guarded the wreckage, the people who picked up the wreckage, the people who drove the wreckage to Roswell, the people who loaded the planes. I mean, they've interviewed everyone, the people who flew the planes, some of the people who've actually studied the wreckage. This case has been verified up, down, and sideways. Even the Air Force wrote a book on it, saying, this is a mogul balloon, and those bodies you thought were actually dummies, which was quickly laughed off and debunked, because we were not using dummies in balloons until the 1954, I think it was, 52, well after Roswell. So Roswell is the grandfather of all UFO cases. It's still relevant, and I think that that craft is somewhere. It's been shipped out and studied and probably parsed out to various places like Area 51 and Edwards Air Force Base in California and Wright-Patterson in Ohio, which is where we study foreign technology. I would like to see that case continue to be researched.
I would agree, and it's nice that, or it's good that you still think there's a lot of value in these historic cases, because I personally do as well. You know, just because a lot of the witnesses have passed away, they've left a lot of information behind, and there's still a lot of paperwork in officialdom that potentially could help unravel a lot of what we're looking into. I mean, I've looked extensively into a case not as old as Roswell, 1970, September 1970, September the 8th, where a lightning crashed into the North Sea, not far from where I live. And I've packed lots and lots of other UFO information around the case. I haven't had to fabricate anything. There's just so much activity surrounding XS894, UFO related, not to pursue it just because it's a historic case or because people think that it was just a tragic accident, which it might have been. But my gut feeling is, and I'd have to jump off the fence here, that this is a UFO related incident. And I've got a case that I've been working on for the last 2 or 3 weeks on the Barmston Drain. Les knows where the Barmston Drain is, and there'll be people in Hull where a UFO landed. Some young boys walking along the Barmston Drain in September 1970. Unbelievable. Wow. I've first-hand account, spoke to the witness, and he might even be in chat, I don't know, because I know it's piqued his interest, Preston, and they're walking along it in the evening, catch sight of an elliptical object. The Barmston Drain, Preston, is a man-made drainage system in the, I think it was the 17 and 1800s to stop the low-lying areas of Hull flooding. And it runs out onto the beach at Barmston, which is about 6 miles from where I live. And it's various widths, 6 foot in places, 20 foot in places, and various depths. But they watch this object come straight down and enter the water at the side of them. Wow. Immediately, they've seen this object, blue, white light around it, black elliptical shaped object, enters the water. Immediately, the water just, huge splash, and it's gone. Don't see nothing else, but then there's a man on the other side of the bank in what they perceive to be a flight suit of some kind with a hat on and goggles, and he's got an instrument and he's moving it about. And I don't know how much time elapsed, but a short time later, they look back into the water. One of the boys sees the water lighting up, and now it's orange, and it's slowly growing in shape and size, and it bursts out of the water, and it's gone, and the man's gone. The strange being or man that was on the bank. What I find fascinating, though, Preston, is that this was in September of 1970. And we've, you know, I can't say it's connected to the UFO event of the lightning, but we're in very close proximity. We've got stories, schoolboys at Flamborough going to see landing traces of a UFO that landed on the cliff tops at Flamborough Head. When? September 1970. There's so many things that sort of point in the UFO direction, should we say. And I know I'm rambling on here because we were talking about historic cases, but these bits of information that keep coming forward are the sole reasons that we should never give up on these historic cases, just because you've got some researchers are saying, oh, we're living past, forget about Rendlesham, it's been done. Forget about Kecksburg, forget about Roswell, let's concentrate on the new cases. Yeah, let's do that. But let's not forget these historic, absolutely information-packed cases that still have a lot of mileage in them. So over to you, Preston. Sorry.
I agree. I don't think the general public is aware of how many cases there are. And speaking of historic cases, there was a case I was aware of that I always liked because it was very close to where I lived. I knew the area. This was at Playa del Rey in Southern California, where a craft landed and 3 vehicles stalled along the Pacific Coast Highway. And saw these 2 figures come out of the craft. They had a face-to-face encounter with them. And it's considered a classic case. It's been published in a number of books, and that was pretty much the extent of it. But researching through the vast UFO literature, I was amazed to find some really good corroboration, because on that day, I found out that the Long Beach police station received well over 100 calls of UFOs in the sky. And this is just miles away. And not only that, the nearby Air Force Base also had a slew of activity on that day at that time.
Yeah.
So this is, not direct confirmation, but what I would call absolute corroboration. And there's a lot of
too many markers. There's
Yeah.
too many markers pointing to what these guys saw as being something genuine and bona fide, that just with the other information that's packing around it. I totally agree with you. And have you any more examples, Preston, of UFO retrievals, that lesser known ones that might interest our listeners?
Oh yeah, this is really actually an astonishing subject, because people talk about UFO crash retrievals and they immediately think of Roswell and a few others, perhaps the Aztec UFO crash in New Mexico, which was around that same time as Roswell. There's another very famous one in Kingman, Arizona in 1954, also called Paradise Valley crash, and Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, 1965. That was pretty well verified. There was quite a few witnesses who saw a strange craft, kind of acorn-shaped, come down. The buzz was that this was a Russian satellite which had crashed, but the witnesses who were there said, no, it wasn't, and there were beings and bodies and so forth. But if you look into the crash retrieval phenomena, I think you'll get a huge surprise. I know I did, because it's not just a handful of cases. There are scores of them, perhaps hundreds. And the reason I say that is because my first clue for that was when I wrote UFOs over California, which covers basically in a historical way UFO activity over California, reaching back a couple of hundred years. And there was quite a few crash retrieval cases. I was shocked. And I started, I was commissioned to do sort of a multi-book contract with Schiffer Books about various states, such as Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, and New York. And all of them had multiple cases of crash retrievals, all of them. New Mexico had the most, which isn't surprising. That is where we do a lot of our atomic research, which UFOs are known to be attracted to.
Where do you think where do you think they went after they'd been retrieved? Where did they go, do you think?
Oh, well, we know to a certain extent.
Or where were they taken?
Yeah, because there's a lot of whistleblowers coming out. I've talked to some myself. By whistleblowers, I mean people who are placed fairly highly, perhaps, in the military-industrial complex, and have talked about their role in these crash retrievals. And as a general rule, a lot of them went to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. As I mentioned, Edwards Air Force Base, Area 51 in Nevada. But if you start looking into it, you will see a lot of them are getting farmed out to various Air Force bases across the US. And this is true for the world, actually. UFO crashes are not unique to the US. They are everywhere. And I think, we're in a situation where it looks like our military is neck deep involved in this. This is a subject they take extremely seriously. And despite their lies and denials, saying, no, if you think you saw UFOs, it's a hoax, a hallucination, or a misperception, that's disingenuous. They knew this was real from the beginning and are spending an enormous amount of time, money, and effort, our tax dollars, on studying this subject, while at the same time lying about it. There are these crafts secreted throughout military bases across the world.
Well, I want to expect you to have an answer for this, and I'm kind of playing devil's advocate because I know that what you're saying is real. I know there's the reality of what you're talking about, but there will be people saying, hold on a minute, these are advanced craft that have either come from some other dimension, they've traveled trillions and trillions of light years, God knows what, and then they crash here. And we've got lots of examples of crashed. What's your views on that? What would you say to those people?
Yeah, that is a little bit of a puzzling enigma, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're so advanced, why would they crash? And I think there's a couple of reasons for this. One is that UFO activity is far more common than people realize. Yeah, you can't just go outside and see a UFO. But if you look at the databases from, say, MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and NUFORC, the National UFO Reporting Center, just to name a couple, they receive 10, 20 reports a day on the average. And I know from personal experience, and I think other researchers will back this up, 1 in 10, that's being generous, it's closer to 1 in 100 people will report their encounter. So my point is, you can times that number 20 by 100. So we're looking at maybe 2,000 reports per day.
Yeah.
So that's a lot. And so everyone makes mistakes, accidents do happen. And the fact is, if you look at the reports of contactees, in fact, Dolly Saffron, the subject of my book Symmetry, talks about this, because I asked her this. And if anyone would know the answer, she would. These craft use our gravitational field lines to travel, interplanetary speaking, not interstellar so much, but when they're on a planet, they're using our gravity field lines, which are very unstable. Our magnetic field lines fluctuate. Any scientist can tell you this. They are wildly fluctuating. So they can just suddenly drop and boom. There's also some evidence that some of these craft have been perhaps, shot down, or according to Roswell, it was a lightning strike. But there's some reports that perhaps it was our own radar, which was interfering with their navigation systems, which caused problems. So I think there are a number of reasons why we're seeing these, but the fact is we are. I mean, we can speculate all we want. The fact is these cases do exist, and we have to
Fascinating.
follow the evidence where it leads us.
I think you give us a good answer there, because if you'd have asked me that question, I don't think I could have given you an answer. I'll be honest with you. So we'll go to Les and see whether he's got any questions, if you're happy to answer a few questions, Preston.
Absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yes, thank you guys, and a great show so far tonight. We've got some great questions in, and thank you everybody who submitted the questions. And if you can think of a question for Preston or Paul, then that would be great, and put them in a chat, and Sky will send them to me. So I've got a question from Jojo, and it's just a question for you, Paul.
Okay.
It might be a quick answer to this one. Hi, Paul. Did Amanda hear or see anything unusual in Danes Dyke on December the 16th?
I think I know who this is, and no, she didn't go. Weather were atrocious, and if it's the Joe I'm thinking it is, and forgive me if I'm wrong, Joe, there's been some unusual howling and strange lights seen on the 16th, but it's due to getting the reports in. It's highlighted that it's happening over a number of years on the 16th. So we planned to do some kind of vigil in there, but we didn't get in. It's purely because of the weather. But I know if you want to connect with me in next day or so, and after Christmas period, I shall speak to Amanda, speak to Steve Ashbridge, and I think Kez, as in Alex Wingfield's in. We'll spend some time in Dyke, but really we want to be trying these nights of high activity, these repeat areas, because I noted that October the 15th and October the 16th, I've got two cryptid reports, one from Jewson Lane, and forgive me if I've got year wrong, but 2019 I believe, and one from Danes Dyke. There's only a day in between the reports, but 2020. What's interesting, there's about 3/4 of a mile apart, and these people who've reported it don't know each other. So I find it fascinating that we've got these areas of high strangeness, but we've got these dates that are repeating, and that might be something we can touch on, Preston, in a moment. But let's just go some questions, please, Les, because Preston.
Yeah, well, Dolly calls them people. She won't use the term abduction. She does not feel it's accurate. But basically, they have all kinds of agendas. They are basically trying to uphold our genetics. So when someone is pulled on board a craft and is being physically examined, it's to make sure that they don't have a whole lot of genetic damage and that they will repair it to the extent that they can. This is the purpose largely for implants as well. It's health related. They are testing for levels of pollution in our body, boosting our immune system, monitoring our vitals. People do have genetic material removed as well. So ETs are studying all aspects of our planet. You can see this from the first-hand reports where these craft land and little beings come out. They have their little shovels and their buckets and they start taking soil samples. They will take samples of vegetation. There's a very famous case in Valençol, France, involving a farmer by the name of Maurice Mass, who wondered where his lavender plants were going to. Someone was stealing them. And finally, he caught them red-handed. It was a UFO landing on his farm, stealing his flowers. And I wrote about this in one of my Not From Here books, Extraterrestrial Gardeners, because there are cases all over the world. One case that always makes me smile is kind of amusing because it involved this couple who were approached by their neighbors who said, "Oh, we saw a UFO hovering over your house the other night." This couple was not aware of that, but it was just a few nights later where she woke up and heard something rattling on her patio and looked down and saw two little grays, little short humanoids, picking leaves off of her split leaf philodendron plant, a Swiss cheese plant. And if you look into, this is a medicinal plant, so perhaps that was the draw here. But she knocked on the window and they ran away, but came back a few days later and stripped pretty much all the remaining leaves off of her philodendron plant. That's just one case of many, many like this. There was another case in France where they were picking dandelions. That's another medicinal flower. So yeah, they're absolutely studying plants and animals and humans, just as we would if we were visiting another planet.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, I've got another question, Paul.
Far away.
That's okay. Yeah, and Lorraine Groves is asking, does Preston have any theories on why certain people are chosen and not others? I mean, you mentioned Dolly was, she's pretty articulate and has a really good memory, Preston. Are people picked for specific traits like this?
100%. Yeah. I mean, there is a random aspect to some encounters. You will see a lot of people who are taken on board are often driving outside late at night on a remote highway. So I think that's what I would call the easy pickings phenomena. But if you look into this, like who's having contact and why, and I did, because after having interviewed several hundred people, I was quite baffled by it. It did seem random. It was evenly divided between men and women. It had nothing to do with your skin color or your ancestry or your blood type, because there was a lot of talk about Rh negative blood at one point, and that really didn't pan out. People tried to link it to military in your family. Well, a lot of people have military in their family. I don't think that's a very strong link. I did find 3 or 4 main patterns, and one is absolutely generational. There does seem to be a pattern where if someone is having contact, particularly repeated onboard experiences, the chances are very good that their parents, aunts and uncles, someone in their genetic family is also having encounters. And there are cases where this stretches back, recorded several generations. So if you're having encounters, your parents, your grandparents, great-grandparents, your children, that is a pattern that is exerting itself. And I think this shows their interest in genetics and basically upgrading or preserving the best of humanity's genetics. Another pattern I did notice, because again, this is divided evenly between men and women. It's got nothing to do with race or politics or education or anything like this. So I was quite confused by that and would ask questions. And I got a real bell ringer once when I was interviewing a lady in Norway who had an experience with grays. They came in and healed her back of severe chronic injury. And I was going through the questions that I asked, and she had no history of encounters. So I thought, well, here we go again. Here's someone who has no history. How can this be? Why her? And I asked her what she did for a living. And she says, well, she was an artist. She's a retired graphics artist, but she's very active in her country doing human rights and animal rights. And that rang a bell for me because I had interviewed a gentleman by the name of Michael Carter not too long before this. And he also had a healing experience. And he was very active fighting against racism. And in fact, had been commended by President Clinton for his work against this. I thought, oh my gosh, there's John Hunter Gray, who fights against, he's a social activist. Betty Hill was a social worker, Betty and Barney Hill. I started looking at my cases and I'm like, wow, there are an awful lot of people here who are doctors, medical doctors, nurses. Dolly Saffron is a nurse, by the way. People who are doing good work for humanity. There was a case in England involving a gentleman who, by the name of Fred White from Durham, England, who had been hospitalized for a hole in his heart and was visited in his hotel room by this weird figure who healed him. He said, we are interested in your works with electronics. He was an inventor. And they said, we are going to heal you, but you need to continue your work. It's important. And so this is the pattern that I've noticed, who are doing good work for humanity in some capacity. But there are other patterns. People who are very psychic, that comes up quite a bit. So those are the three main patterns I found. But again, it can sometimes be completely random. Friends of contactees will, or if you happen to be driving along and a contactee, you can be pulled on board as well.
So in a way then, are they actually kind of playing God and steering people and selected individuals in the direction that they want for their end game, their vision of the development of the human race?
Well, I wouldn't put it quite that way. I think that if you look at it, they respect our autonomy, our free will, because there have been cases where people have been healed and they're like, we can't heal all your injuries because some of these are karmic. And there are cases where people absolutely reject contact and contact will stop. So I don't think that they're playing God in any way. I think what they're doing, here's a case that I think really speaks towards this question. It occurred to Jim Law from Gainesville, Florida, and he was having encounters and he wasn't particularly happy about it, but it caused him some fear and trauma. He didn't like it. And then these grays showed up again. And by this point, he's just kind of sick and tired of it. He's over his fear. He's like, oh, here they are again. If you're really, going to take me, why don't you just heal my hernia? He had been suffering from this hernia, medically diagnosed. He has the paperwork and everything. And they said, we know of this condition that you speak and we will repair it. And they did. He's like, oh, wow. Why are you taking me? What's the deal with this? Why are you so interested in me? And they said, oh, we are interested in your genetic potential to live a long time. And that really struck him profoundly because his grandfather was 106 and still spry, active and healthy. In fact, he has many long-lived members in his family. I think this speaks towards them. And I've got other cases I could march out that sort of go along these lines. This shows that they're trying to do what's good for us. As any parent would, they're protecting people and helping to the extent that they can without stepping in and solving all our problems. Because every parent knows you can't tie your children's shoes forever. That, you cannot spoon feed them. They have to go out on their own and solve their own problems. And that's what people have been flat out told by the ETs. We can only intervene to a certain degree, but it's up to you to solve your own problems.
Thank you.
Okay, I might get one more question in, Paul, and the question is, it's from Octopus Ride. Welcome to the show, Octopus. Question for Paul, this one actually. Do you have any indication, Paul, that the werewolf / dogmen sightings are bad omens?
I don't know. I know that the stories of folklore talk about these things in not all instances, but in many instances of some kind of portent of doom. The cases that I've looked into, and more importantly for me and Les, some of the cases that we've looked into for Wolflands, nobody's been hurt. Whilst being in close proximity to these creatures, whatever they are, whatever form they take, whether they're interdimensional, whether they're actually living and breathing flesh, blood and bone creatures that are here all the time, which I don't quite believe, but nobody's been hurt. But I've come away feeling that there's a strong element of fear. They seem to like to induce fear. And we're going to touch on some of this, not necessarily the fear aspect, with Preston probably in the latter half of this talk, because I know he's written a book on the cryptids, and I think your views have changed dramatically on what you first thought, Preston. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got to tell us. But no, I don't know. I mean, it's purely speculative, isn't it? I mean, because one person's opinion, it's totally different to another. I think that I've come away feeling, after the people that we've interviewed and the people that I've spoke to over the years who've seen these things, I've come away feeling that there's been a massive element of fear, but nobody's actually got hurt. There is a physical aspect to these creatures. I don't think that it's something that you could touch and put your hand through, because, prime example, one of our witnesses in the forest could hear this thing breathing. So that kind of implies that there's some lung capacity there, there's something there. But then you've got this other element, this woo element, where our gamekeeper said he never actually saw it walking. It arrived, didn't see any leg movement, you know. And so there's so many things at play, and I don't think these things are at play to mess with our minds. I just think it's the attributes that these things have. And I've gone round trees a lot there, people. So, but I want to touch on some of this with Preston later. So go on, Les.
Okay, well, if you're good, then I'll leave the questions for now, or you can have some more questions.
No, let's do a few questions later. But and are you happy with that, Preston? And
yeah, sure.
So shall we step away from UFOs then and step into the footsteps of the cryptids and get your take on it? Because what's the title of the book?
I've written a little bit about that. There was one I wrote called a Bigfoot, Yeti, and Other Ape Men. I also wrote a book called Supernatural California, which had a whole section on the entire comprehensive history of Sasquatch and Bigfoot in California. Not to mention lake monsters, because California does have quite a few lakes, like Lake Elsinore and Lake Elizabeth and Lake Tahoe, which do have apparent cryptids in them. And we've got a long coastline, and boy, was I shocked to find out a long history with some very excellent witnesses involving what we would call sea serpents or sea monsters, which are not, accepted by mainstream science. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting cryptids going on that I think still deserve quite a bit more research.
Well, then, before we move to the cryptids, then, as regards the Bigfoot phenomena, give us a few examples of the sea serpents, please, if you've got any off the top of your head.
Yeah, I mean, there was one that really impressed me because it involved the guy who invented the Cox reel. He's a major fisherman. Another guy by the name of Bandini, who was head of the fishing club. And they were all out on a boat one day when they saw this very large creature. And what was interesting is there were some pretty large swells in the ocean that day. And what really struck them was that they could see this creature with a hump and a big neck coming out of the water, and a giant head with eyes the size of dinner plates, a mane on its back. And it was not moving up and down in these swells, which would imply that this was several tons. Even their boat was going up and down in these swells, but this creature wasn't. So it was huge, and they got as close as they could before it dived down. But this creature, its neck alone rose at least 20 feet out of the water. So this was big. And that was one very well documented case. And turns out there's quite a few of them along the San Clemente area. And this is interesting because this is an area of high levels of UFO activity as well. But if you go up the coast of California, we have what's called the Monterey Trench, which is extremely deep, especially for being so close to the coast. It's a marine sanctuary. There's an enormous variety of wildlife there. And it being so deep, there's plenty of places for things to hang out that still have not been fully identified. It's amazing how many cases there are of sea serpents throughout the world, but quite a few just along the Southern California coast.
And it strikes me as that case you've just talked about, it's pretty locational as regards the concentration of sightings there, isn't it? You know, and what's interesting, you said it had some kind of mane, or appeared to have. I think it was 1934 at a little fishing town called Filey, which is very close to Bridlington, 6 miles away. And I don't know exact date, and somebody might correct me and say it was 1935, but I think it was 1934. And it was a coast guard that claimed that he'd seen a sea monster in the bay, not actually in the bay, not in the water. Said it had a huge head that rose up, and it had a mane and eyes as big as dinner plates. See, that's the description. You'll find reference to it, I would think, somewhere on the internet if people are interested. What is interesting, the Filey sighting predates Loch Ness. You know, because obviously lots of people are familiar with, but I've spoken to people around the area of Loch Ness, salmon fishermen, who've had no interest in the Loch Ness monster, but gone for years and years without seeing anything, but then seen it, or claimed to have seen it. So it is fascinating. And this is about you, Preston, but I just want to get this one in. When I was looking into Wilsthorpe, the UFO case that I wrote extensively about, which is again is very close to this location where I'm sat now, I did a bit of door knocking, and I ended up speaking to another Coast Guard, retired, at Wilsthorpe. Now there's nothing at Wilsthorpe. There's 16 flats and there's a few houses, so this guy could easily be tracked down if anybody wanted to do it. I've no need to say his name, but he's a retired Coast Guard. And I asked him if he'd had any knowledge of the UFOs that were allegedly seen on September the 15th, 2009, with the military arrived as well, Chinooks, Lynx helicopters, everything after the sighting. And that's documented, and I've got the paperwork for that. And he said he didn't know anything about it, but he said, but I've seen a sea monster. And my ears just pricked up. And he said, if he ever listens to this, I might have got it wrong. I'm sure he said he was an engineer in the Royal Navy, and he was down in the bowels of the ship, and there's a chimney, and during the night they could climb a ladder, and they could walk round a gantry. They weren't supposed to, and they could just, basically, I suppose they were just idling a bit of time away. And he was in South China Sea, and he said there's a moonlit night, and this thing's at the side of the warship, and it's just weaving along, and it's as long as the ship, and just went into the night. And he was quite happy to tell me that. He'd no knowledge of the UFOs that I were asking about, but he told me that story. So they're there. These reports are there. I mean, you've probably collected a lot more than myself, but I've no doubt that these things exist. It's just they're as elusive as the UFO, aren't they? We're not actually getting to grips with them and seeing solid, superb photographs, are we, or some kind of evidence? Unless you've seen evidence that I've not.
There are some television programs now, because this is a subject that is gaining in interest. I think it's Paranormal Caught on Camera, which has some really remarkable footage of what looked like, perhaps not giant serpents, but something even more than that. And the research on this is excellent. I would recommend the books of Bernard Heuvelman, I think is his name. And he's been looking into this for years. He's now passed, but he's got some very interesting books which document scores upon scores of cases. And for a long time, people talked about giant squid, and they were not proven. Now they are. They have been caught on photographs, films.
Yeah.
We know they're real. I am absolutely 100% convinced there are creatures out there, because just talking about these sea monsters off the Southern California coast, the reports are incredibly consistent. People do describe this mane. They describe these large eyes. The head of these creatures almost always described as being very much like a giraffe, even up to the little tiny sort of horn-like protrusions on its head. So it's really amazing, because people, generally speaking, don't know about these reports, and they are really surprised when they first see them.
Does anybody talk about bioluminescence and self-illuminating eyes or anything?
It does come up, eye shine, in a couple of cases, but that's not super consistent, because I think the conditions really have to be right to see that. That comes up quite a bit more in Bigfoot cases.
Yeah.
Glowing
well,
eye.
we're going to get to that, but let's now, seeing as we're in the ocean, let's just jump to UFOs temporarily. And what about USOs? Have you got any good reports that you can share with us about craft underwater?
Boy, do I. I got pulled into that really early on. I came into this field as a skeptic in 1986 and became a field investigator for the Mutual UFO Network. Started interviewing people who had encounters, starting with my own family, by the way, friends and coworkers, but branching out from there. And immediately started getting reports of what I would call USOs, unidentified submersible objects. And off the Southern California coast, it's quite active. And over the years, because I kept getting reports and I started getting asked to speak about it, these started to really snowball. And I found that there were quite a long history of encounters of USOs, stretching really all the way back to the 1920s, probably earlier, in just this one area. And I've since gotten reports from all over the world, and some really interesting ones. One that comes to mind was actually at a lake in Hot Springs, Arkansas, Lake Hamilton, where 4 kids had taken out a speedboat. One of their parents owned a speedboat, and they were just there, 2 couples, having fun. And this object rose up right next to the boat. And it was quite large, larger than the boat itself, round, black in color, and making this weird noise. And the girls became quite frightened. They're like, let's get out of here. And so the guy I interviewed, he was driving the boat and immediately started the boat up and tried to drive off and couldn't. The boat was stuck to this object. And they completely panicked. And the next thing they know, they had missing time. The object was gone. They were in a different location on the lake. They rushed home. It was 2-3 hours later than it should have been. So he has there's other indications that he is a contactee. Doesn't remember what happened, but it's certainly an interesting case. But if I could, I have even a more interesting case. Real brief. I'll try to be brief. But this case just, it's so amazing, because this gentleman I interviewed, Ray Sachs is his name, was in his late 60s and felt, I'm getting older. I want to tell my story before it's too late. And he was an electrician's mate on the USS Clamagore. This is a Navy submarine which carried nuclear-tipped torpedoes back in the 70s. And in 1971, he was stationed as a lookout on the Clamagore with another petty officer, the commander and the second in command. They were riding on the surface of the ocean on the East Coast up towards, New York, Canada area. Pretty far out, 12 miles out or so. And it was at night, and they're moving at about 12 knots when he says this bright light came zooming in from the stern, very fast, 100 knots, far faster than any submarine or anything we have. It was underwater, and it was circular in shape. They couldn't tell how deep it was, but it was not deep, because they could see this huge circular light. Came right up next to the submarine. Now, this is absolutely not another submarine or anything, because you cannot approach that close when out at sea. Anything closer to than a quarter mile is considered a near miss and extremely dangerous. And so this thing actually tracked the submarine, paced it for 15 minutes. During that time, they could not see it on sonar. They heard nothing. They estimated it was about 100 feet in diameter. All the higher ranking officers came up on board to take a look at it. And finally it zoomed off in another direction at about 80 knots. And the second in command, this is according to the guy I interviewed, Ray Sachs, the second in command turns to the commander and says, "Sir, how would you like me to report this in the log?" And the commander said, "Officers who report this kind of thing in the log do not move up in rank." Pretty much a direct quote. So this was not written down in the log, which, having talked about this, I've had other submariners and they said, "Oh yeah, we've had these sort of things happen. It's not recorded in the logs." So I think this happens far more often than our Navy is saying.
I would agree, Preston. And I touched on we touched on the historic cases earlier, and I'll just jump back to the lightning temporarily. The 1970 September the 8th lightning, and there's so many aspects, like I said before, that kind of point it into some kind of unexplained phenomena occurring in and around the time of the lightning. There was, at the time that aircraft crashed on September the 8th, 1970, I think there was 3 RAF Marine launchers based in Bridlington, which is the fishing town that I live in. A few days before it crashed, one of the RAF Marine launchers off out of the bay of Bridlington struck an unknown submersed object. It tore a 12-inch by 25-foot hole in its hull and had to be beached on North Beach. I mean, I've got the pictures. It's not just Paul talking about this. Was it a UFO? Nobody can say, can they? But that was unusual. That was a few days before Lightning XS crashed. A few days after Lightning XS crashed, and when I say a few, I haven't got these figures in my head. It could be 6 days after. But 6 miles away at Barmston, there's a speedboat with the father and daughter in it, and a family friend, and Mum's watching front beach. She says they weren't going very fast when it struck a submersed object below the surface and disintegrated. The boat disintegrated. They were clinging to wreckage. A pleasure cruiser called the Glen Rose found them. I mean, I did manage to contact the son, who was obviously from 1970. He'd have been about 7 or 8 years old, and he'd have been getting on in years, but he wouldn't talk to me about it. I weren't trying to influence him and say it were UFO related. I just wanted information about how it happened. But so many things pack around these unusual cases. Sorry to jump to that, Preston, but because I want to talk about the cryptids. Have you any more to add on the USOs?
Oh, I mean, I could talk about UFOs for hours upon hours.
Well, can I just interject here, chaps? We're just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. Paul, your website is on the screen at truthproof.uk. For those people who haven't been, can you tell people what they can do when they get there?
Well, there's quite a lot now of totally original UFO reports that have come to Truth Proof. And as I've said many times, anybody who wants to use them on their website, or if they want to write a book and they want to incorporate some of these sightings, by all means do it. You've got my blessing to do it. Just give us a bit of credit for supplying you with the reports. And the books, the paperback books, can be obtained off the website, truthproof.uk. And they're also for sale on Amazon, as in the Kindle versions. And the paperbacks are also on eBay as well. And over to Preston. Where can people get your material, Preston?
Thanks, Paul. I do have a website. If you just punch my name in, it should take you there. The actual address is prestondennett.weebly.com. All my books are there, excerpts. You can certainly contact me through my website. I also have a YouTube channel. I'm all over social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. My books are available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other online retailers. Yeah, I can be reached pretty easily.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, and I got to say at this point, thanks for all the questions what have come in tonight. I don't know if you want to move on with your discussion, Paul, or do you want some more questions at some point?
Excuse me. I would like to talk to Preston about the cryptids, because I think everybody knows that I'm probably a little bit like Preston. I had no interest in this at all, and I've not really given it any great thought until these witnesses started coming to me, and I thought, you know what? I've got to jump off the fence here. These people are genuine. They're telling me their truth. And yeah, I believe a lot of what they've told me. We do get cases where I'm very polite to people, but I never really follow them up. But for the most part, we've got some fabulous cases, and I know you have, Preston. So just tell us a little bit about them, please, or some of the more notable ones.
Yeah, cryptozoology was a subject I avoided, sort of like UFOs. I was skeptical, and when I found out UFOs were real, I was certainly aware of the Bigfoot phenomena. You can't help but not be aware of it in today's day and age. But I avoided it. I was afraid of be opening up a can of worms, and honestly, I suspected that it might be real. And I thought, do I really want to go there? Because that's a whole new can of worms, as I said. But you have to follow the evidence where it leads you. And the day came when I started getting Bigfoot reports. And if you're an objective researcher, it does no use whatsoever to ignore evidence, and can actually be quite damaging, I think. So when I first got my first Bigfoot report, I'm like, okay, I guess I have to look into this. And it just happened to be one of those rare cases in which UFOs and Bigfoot intersect. And if you look into this, you will see that there are a good number of cases. Most people who see Bigfoot aren't going to see a UFO, and vice versa. Most people who see UFOs certainly aren't going to see a Bigfoot. But there are cases where they do appear at the same time. And this one did, absolutely. It involved a radiologist and a good witness. And he basically described this UFO that had landed in his backyard. This was in an area known as Canyon Country, which is outside of LA, but borders the Los Angeles National Forest, which is huge. It's an enormous wilderness area. And I didn't quite realize how big until I started researching it. And he said the very next night, he had a Bigfoot encounter. And he felt like it was almost telepathically linked up to him. He knew what it was thinking, and it knew what he was thinking. That quite shocked me, because I did not know that this is actually a thing. Looking into other Bigfoot reports, there are a number of accounts of telepathy with these guys. So this was my kind of rude introduction to the Bigfoot UFO connection and Bigfoot in general. And certainly was not the last case I had like that, but started getting more Bigfoot cases because California is the #1 producer of Bigfoot and Sasquatch in the United States, followed close by Oregon and Washington. Canada, of course, is all about Bigfoot, but it's in every state, pretty much without exception. And yeah, I ended up doing quite a bit of research into Bigfoot and was shocked, absolutely shocked to find out that this is 100% verified. I mean, if you don't believe in Bigfoot, you have plain and simply not done your homework. There's footprint evidence, hair samples, sound recordings, films, footage. The evidence is 100% overwhelming in terms of the sheer number of reports reaching back hundreds of years up to the present day. It is an astonishing field of study that I'm surprised hasn't been pushed more into the mainstream.
What are they? Are they flesh and blood residing in these locations, in your opinion, or is there a UFO, or is there a paranormal connection to them? Because they seem to have attributes that take them far away from any normal animal, living and breathing mammal that I can think of, with this people to mind speak, and the way that they travel. People talk about them just gliding rather than running. I've got reports that like that myself. What's your opinion?
I think there's truth to that for sure. And if you look into this, you'll see one thing is very clear. We're not dealing with one particular type. There are Bigfoot that are 12 feet tall and shaggy, and ones that are short-haired, and ones that are, quite short. Wild men that look practically human. It kind of depends on what region you're in, because there are clearly different types. I think some of these are absolutely sentient, intelligent beings, as intelligent perhaps as we humans, though perhaps not tool using as we would think of it, or constructing cities and so forth, but are perhaps more psychically developed than we are. So this is where we do see accounts of them doing things that we would consider paranormal. And I think the answer to this, and I'm kind of speculating here, but just this is based on firsthand reports from people I've talked to, because I did talk to a guy who saw them disappear in front of his eyes, not jump into the woods, disappear and reappear. They said, we do have this ability. So having talked to people who've had these really paranormal type of encounters, I talked to another lady, she's like, we were communicating telepathically. It's clear to me that they do have these abilities, as some humans do, particularly, enlightened masters and yogis and stuff who have reportedly levitated or turned invisible or teleported or can, manifest ashes or objects or what have you. So I think we're dealing with a being that is, in some cases, very psychically advanced. And I think this connects to the whole UFO phenomena, because people are saying, oh, are these aliens? I'm not so sure that they're aliens as we would think of it, because reports stretch back a long time. They've been on this planet. It's clear they're living. There is a population. It's clear it's physical. People have got hair samples, blood samples. They are leaving footprints. They're stealing livestock. They're picking plants. There's urine and fecal samples. This is a physical creature with paranormal attributes. And I think when it comes to UFOs, perhaps they're in contact like people are. There are, this sounds so wild, Bigfoot contactees. That's what I think is going on here. Yes, they're in contact with ETs just like some people are. I think that's what the connection is when it comes to UFOs. But some of these might be your normal sort of primate, perhaps not super intelligent and just kind of out there and undiscovered. But people are like, why is there no Bigfoot body? Well, they take care of their dead, perhaps, or perhaps they are moving off into another higher dimension, have the ability to travel interdimensionally. There's a lot going on here it's a bit difficult to unpack. It's a new field of research.
It's very difficult to unpack, and listening to you talking there, and I'm no different. It's almost like, and we talk about the people who want the subject of the unexplained suppressed, and they just move the goalposts or feed us a little bit. It's almost like we're moving the goalposts, because I'm not just labeling you there, Preston. I'm thinking same thing. Well, they've got so many attributes, and they can become invisible, and they can do mind speak, but they are flesh and blood. And we're fitting it into everything, but it's such a mixed bag, and we're getting these reports with no option but to discuss them like this. And I think you've probably jumped off fence because you've had your own experience. Am I right?
That's right. Yeah, I did get a call from a lady who lived on the other side of the LA National Forest in Acton, in the high deserts of California, and she was having encounters. And I interviewed her, and she's like, oh yeah, I've heard it screaming. I've smelled this thing. It smells like dirty socks and rotten garbage and death and sweat. And she gave a very good description of its odor. And her son saw it. It was standing in the tree outside his bedroom window and cracked a branch right off. Her roommate saw it looking in the window. She heard this big clunk one night on the roof and went outside, and there was a fairly large boulder on the roof of her house. And if you look into Bigfoot accounts, they're all about rock throwing. So this was clearly a legitimate case. And I went over to her house. I interviewed her. I talked to her son, roommate. It was a good case. She showed me footprints. They were not really legible in terms of being absolute, clear footprints, but I did see the broken branch in the tree. And she was in telepathic contact with this thing. She says, it's very interested in me. It likes me. They don't kidnap people, do they? I said, oh no, that's never been reported. This was sort of in the beginning of my research. I didn't know that, in fact, yes, they do. The Native Americans talk quite a bit about this, and there are some dozen or more cases of people who have been essentially kidnapped, picked up by these things, carried. So I had to call her back and say, well, you know what? That does happen. That freaked her out a little bit. But she says, I know where this thing lives. I'm like, what do you mean? She says, I'm pretty darn sure it's in this valley, not far from my house. It lives in caves. I'm like, okay, well, let's go there. She says, I can take you there. And that's what we did. We went up there one evening. This is in the mid-1990s. And drove up there. We brought camera equipment and sound equipment. And we decided to go at dusk when it's getting dark, because that's when it often will come out. These are nocturnal creatures for the most part. And she lived right off the 5 freeway, a couple of miles. So, I mean, not far from civilization, but again, right on the edge of this vast wilderness area, the LA National Forest, which, I did my research and I found many accounts of Bigfoot in this exact area. So she didn't know about that. I searched her house looking for, books and stuff on the subject. She's very scientifically minded. But at any rate, we went out there and pulled over on this dirt road overlooking this ravine, which is very steep. You could not hike down there. It goes up this very steep mountain, 45-degree angle, thick with brush. It's just not traversable by, any easy means, certainly. And it had just pretty much gotten dark. The stars were beginning to come out. We opened the door. She's pulling out the sound equipment and stuff. I'm surveying the area, and I walk around to the front of the car, and I heard this thing roar. And my first thought was a plane was swooping down, a jet overhead. But you look up, there's no air traffic there really at all. And I'm looking around, it's this loud roaring sound, and it's vibrating in your chest. And, I grew up in a Topanga Canyon. We have wildcat there, cougars. I've heard there was a house next door that kept pet cougars, so I know what that sounds like. I love bears. I've researched bears. I was at the zoo and a lion roared right next to me. This was not any of those. This thing vibrated in your chest in a way that's really hard to describe. And it lasted like 5 seconds, maybe 10, a long time. She completely lost her mind. And I started running towards the source of the sound, perhaps foolhardy, but that's what I did. I wanted to see it, and it roared again. And this time I could kind of triangulate it. It was right there in that ravine. It could not have been more than 100 yards away, 100 meters. It was close. And she's like, what are you doing? Get back in the car. We're leaving now. And she says it roared 3 times. I'm pretty sure it was twice, because I was paying very close attention.
Yeah.
And she was so hysterical that she absolutely would not let me stay, because I was ready to stay.
Have you thought about going back, Preston, and independent to this lady and spending a bit of time there?
Yeah, and I did. Hoping that, it would come. It didn't. She eventually moved away. She's now in Australia. But I have hiked out in the wilderness and stuff, and I'm hoping to have another encounter. And I may have had another encounter. It's a little bit more ambiguous than this one, but that one was absolutely, I am convinced, 100% it was Bigfoot. She sure was. And my sister-in-law had gone out with her as well prior to this, and they had what they believe was an encounter with the same exact creature. They heard it stomping through the woods. They said it was bipedal, whatever it was. They could hear its footsteps.
The raw, obviously designed to let you know it was there. I mean, I would have thought, wouldn't you? But
yeah.
Do you think that they know your thoughts? Is that one of their abilities? Do you think that they can perceive what you're thinking, or your intent? Maybe not even thoughts. They might pick things up in a different way that we can't even comprehend.
Yeah, and this is precisely why I think they're so hard to see, because they are not only like, a lot of animals in our wilderness have excellent senses, far superior to our own in terms of sense of smell, perhaps. But yeah, psychically aware. So they will know when you're around and can pick up on these sort of things. And yeah, there are cases where I think they are aware of what you're thinking and will intentionally show themselves.
Yeah. We've got 3 people went into the forest and had one experience in Wolflands. We've only spoke to 2 witnesses, but witness number 3, who we've not spoken to, the other 2 witnesses say that he knew it was there. Whatever this thing was, they describe something like a huge bipedal wolf. But whatever this thing was, they said he knew it was there an hour before it revealed itself. And he was telling them it were being watched. And one last thing before we kind of check whether Les has got any questions. I think he has. For something that wants to remain elusive, why is it throwing rocks? I'm devil's advocate here. That somebody else asked me similar questions to me. Why do you think it's throwing rocks? Why is it making its presence known if it wants to be so elusive?
Yeah, it's very interesting Bigfoot behavior if you go into it, which is very similar to primate behavior and in some ways human behavior. They're territorial. There's no doubt about this. There are case after case after case where people go out into the woods and they get consumed with this fear that almost seems to sweep over them in a weird way. I think this speaks towards their ability to communicate telepathically. There's every indication that they are territorial certainly in some cases, because they could just run off, but no, they live in areas that are pretty much identifiable. All these cases on a map, and this has been done. You will see that all these places where they are being seen are generally quite wild. They do have a water source, there's streams, there's a food source, deer, rabbits, fox, so forth. They tend to cluster around ridges, high altitude areas, and stream beds. There are areas that are very well known for having high levels of Bigfoot activity. Bluff Creek in Northern California pretty much introduced the world to the idea of UFOs when there was a couple of really famous cases in the Patterson Gimlin footage. But that area continues to produce a lot of activity. And yes, I've talked to people who've had this, that rocks thrown at them. These people were staying in a cabin and they ended up leaving because this Bigfoot was just an angry Bigfoot. They can be quite hostile. There are cases where they have attacked people. There are cases of very friendly Bigfoot as well. So you have a real bell curve here of behavior.
It's almost human-like, because we've got good and bad people, haven't we? Sounds like we've got nothing different there. We'll go to Les for questions in a moment, but just before we do, I just want to reach out to everybody. Bob Brown, everybody knows Bob, who's a friend of Les, myself, and I think you've been on Bob Brown's radio show, Preston, in the past, and he's had an operation on his leg, and he's hunkered down, and he's suffering at the moment. He's in a lot of pain, so everybody just a few kind thoughts towards Bob, and he lives in about 100 yards away from me at the moment, so all the best to Bob. Les, have we got any questions?
Wow, yes, lots and lots of questions, and I'm hoping I can get through some of these questions tonight. First of all, I've got to say a big thank you to a super chat that came in from Lee Roscoe of £20. Thank you immensely, Lee, for that super chat. That's very, very, very generous. And I've got to thank everybody for going on tonight's chats tonight and giving us the questions to ask our guest. I've got to start off with this question. Let's have a look if I can find my place now. Let's just bear with me. Paul Wallace. Could it be that there's more than one agency abducting, because the South American people have been treated horrendously? So I don't know what he means by just the one agency there.
Probably
Preston.
aimed at Preston, that.
Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of ways I would answer that. Yeah, there are, of course, different species. There's grays, there's praying mantis, there's human looking, but they all are humanoid. They all basically have the same heritage. And there's also a real problem here that we're dealing with, and that is our governments are conducting what investigators call MILABs, military abductions. And these are faked abductions in which people are made to believe it's ETs, and it's not. And these are horrendous. And there was a very well-known series of events in Colares in Brazil, which were quite negative. And I think there's quite a bit of talk about these cases being possibly part of this MILAB operation. So I think this is where some of these really horrendously negative cases are truly coming from, to be perfectly honest. That, and also this can be an experience that is quite traumatic for people. But as I mentioned earlier, yeah, being taken on board and physically examined can cause a lot of fear. People will have trauma, nightmares, can't sleep unless the lights are on and there's locks on the doors and so forth. But as contact continues, they realize, okay, they're not here to hurt me. This is a very sensitive subject. It's quite controversial. So I understand, my heart goes out to people who feel like this has been a negative experience for them. But that's why I kind of was really excited to talk to Dolly Safran, because she really helped clarify events like this for me, and for that matter, many other people I've interviewed. I don't think that they're here to take over or hurt us or kill us or eat us for lunch. They could have easily if that was what they wanted to do. There's no evidence of this, that they're here, to specifically cause harm. And I know I'm kind of a broken record with this, but that is my take on it. That's my assessment. I'm sure that there are other researchers who've come out with different, I know there's a few. David Jacobs is one who feel like this is a negative phenomenon, but most no. I would point to Edith Fiore. I would point to John Mack, Barbara Lamb, and many other researchers, Timothy Good, Michael Hesseman. I don't think that they're here to hurt us. There is a narrative being put forth, a false ET threat narrative by our media, by our governments, to make this look scary. It's not. They're not here to hurt us. They've been around longer than we have.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Preston. Yeah. I've got a question from Tony Hewitt. I don't quite understand the question myself, but I will ask the question. Any experience of the clearing out of the aliens from the DUMBs, DUMBS, going on right now?
I know he knows what this is.
Yeah, deep underground military bases.
That kind of got me, acronym there, yeah.
Those are called DUMBs. Yeah, there are reports of supposedly ETs working with humans. This could be disinformation and misinformation. There are absolutely, I think, some well-verified cases like the 1954 meeting at Edwards Air Force Base with President Eisenhower and alleged ETs. So I think there is some truth to some of these cases, but as far as I know, I don't have any good reporting on ETs being held in deep underground military bases. I think they themselves probably do have undersea bases, perhaps like one off the Southern California coast, because boy, oh boy, do I have so many cases there, and other areas across our planet. And I think, yeah, they probably do occasionally evacuate these, particularly recently, because our planet is going through some major upheavals now in terms of the collapse of the magnetic field, giant CMEs, coronal mass ejections coming at us. We're in a pretty tricky time right now. So I think there is probably some truth to that, but again, that's not really my area of expertise, deep underground military bases. So it's really hard for me to speak to that.
Thank you.
Thanks for, sorry, let's go on.
Rebecca King is asking, has Preston met any aliens during his astral projections?
Yeah, I sure have, a couple of times. And I'd say the most dramatic one, I did start having out-of-body experiences when I was a young man, which kind of came in conjunction with researching UFOs. And astral projection is a complete subject that's, we could talk for hours about, but it is well verified. It's something we all can do. It's nothing special. We are all doing it every night. Just to preface this, that this is something we can do. Travel out of body in a dream body, a soul body. Call it what you will, the astral body. And I've had a lot of experiences with this, traveling across the planet and to the other side, and meeting with deceased loved ones and what we would call the heavenly realms, going there. And yeah, there's been a few experiences I've had, which I think did involve ETs. The most dramatic one being one time I did do you do exercises. It's relaxation exercises, and you feel this sort of electric vibration and you pop out of your body. It's awesome. I can't recommend it enough. There's a lot of literature on this if you want to learn how to do it. And I popped out.
I was going to ask if you did this with meditation, what means that you or what methods you use to achieve this? But is that it? Is any food source, anything that you have to do to deprive yourself of, or before getting into this state?
No, I mean, I think it is helpful to, not smoke and drink, perhaps. And meditation is really the key to it. Physical relaxation and mental relaxation and meditation, visualizations, affirmations. Again, there's quite a bit of literature on this. I did write a book on my own experiences and how to do it. But you can definitely look this up. It's absolutely doable. It might be a steep learning curve, but it took me about 2 months of really buckling down before the first one. But this one time I did pop out of body, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to the other side, because that's where the action is. I mean, it's all fun, all kinds of fun to travel, here on Earth. But really, the real action is in what we would call the heavenly realms, or the upper realms, the other side. That's where your deceased loved ones are, and you can visit them, spirit guides, learn about past lives, go to healing temples, the Akashic Library. I mean, it's endless. So that's what I was doing. I'm like, okay, here we go. And off I went. And for me, I just kind of travel real fast. And as I'm going through this sort of veil between the worlds, I guess I would call it, I saw a figure, or what looked like eyes, way up ahead, a person. I'm like, oh, look, there's somebody. That's weird, because normally I don't see anybody until I get to the other side. And as I got closer, it became more apparent to me that this was a person with big, dark almond eyes. I'm like, this is weird. And came up right next to them, and it was a gray. It was a gray ET if I've ever seen a gray, which I hadn't at that point, not consciously. I had a missing time UFO encounter, but I don't remember what happened. But yeah, it was a gray ET for sure, with a big head and large eyes, and right next to me. And boy, that gave me I was startled, putting it mildly.
I bet you were.
And it turned its head and watched me go by. I regret now not stopping, going, hey, dude, how are you doing?
Do you know, Preston, when you were talking then, I sort of gestured with my finger, but I didn't want to stop you in full flow. And it's probably nothing, but I don't know whether it's been picked up during the chat, but there's a bit of echo on my microphone at odd times. But I heard a voice. That's the reason I'm saying it. I don't know when it were now, but if you people watch me holding my finger up, and it weren't me. There were a voice that's why I kind of went like that, because I wanted to just say, If you heard a voice then, it wasn't me. But anyway, we'll move on to another question. I just wanted to bring that up because it's, you know, we've been doing these live streams for a long time now. That's the first time anything like that has ever happened. I definitely heard it, but I'm hoping it might have been picked up in the room. And just one thing as well, you know, we're at the end of 2022, and from myself and Les and everybody else and Sky, everybody that helps us, I'd just like to say thank you very much for all help and support that we've had, not just 2022, but prior to that. So thank you, and let's hope we can keep it going throughout into 2023. Questions, Les?
Right, I'll echo that, and thanks for the answer there, Preston. And really, Preston, we could do a whole show just on the astral projection and things that you've experienced.
Yeah, sure could.
Right.
I love it.
Yeah, so Jane Louise Bowery, welcome to the show, Jane, if you're still here. And just before I ask Jane's question, I've got to welcome, I saw Dean Coolin in the chat, so welcome to the show, Dean, special friend of Truth Proof.
And Jane, and Lorraine Groves and everyone else, you know, it's all good.
Yeah, they're all special friends. And so the question is, Preston, have you ever been followed or received strange phone calls or visits?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jen. Thanks. Yeah, actually, that has happened on a few rare occasions. Fairly recently, when I just met Dolly Safran face to face at the UFO convention, because she talked about that, being followed and surveilled by government goons, presumably, which I've heard other contactees talk to me about. I mean, one guy, I told him, write down all your experiences, you know, keep a diary, and he did. Someone broke into his house and stole them. Didn't steal his money, his TV or anything, stole his contact notes. Another lady, she had her hypnosis tape stolen. And Dolly has complained of surveillance throughout her life from a little girl onward, and sent me photographs and evidence of this. And so we were on our way back from the convention to the Airbnb. This is, you know, the UFO MegaCon. It's like a full week long. I'm driving and she's in the passenger seat. And I said, Dolly, I think someone's following us. And she's like, oh, really? And I'm like, yeah, because they, you know, the Airbnb, the little house we were renting was on a side street off the main highway, and you had to turn several times. And this car was following us around each corner. And kept driving. We went right up to, and they followed every curve right behind us. I'm like, they're definitely following us. It's like, I'm not surprised. You know, I deal with this. And we pulled into the driveway and walked inside, and this car pulled a U-turn and parks, blocking the driveway, blocking it. I mean, this was overt, almost threatening. I'm like, look, Dolly, look. It's like, I told you, you know, I live with this daily. I'm like, well, I see it now. I mean, I've had other occasions of that. When I first started researching real quick, I was doing a major investigation into a wave of sightings over Topanga Canyon from 1992 to 94. And I had called the police and I'd put out flyers and I was going door to door. I mean, I was out there, very visible. And I received a call from a gentleman who asked me to identify myself as, you know, Preston Dennett, which I did. I'm like, yeah, that's me. Who are you? He's like, I believe he gave me his name. I can't remember it, but he started going on and on. He's like, oh, I have a top secret clearance. I worked in the Navy. I did satellite mapping during the war and blah, 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 and going on and on about this. And I'm like, okay, why are you calling me? He says, well, I'm here to warn you that what you are doing is dangerous. I'm like, oh, okay, what do you mean? He's like, you're barking up the wrong tree. You don't know what you're dealing with here. I'm like, oh, what am I dealing with? He says, it's not what you think it is. And so he started talking in circles. I'm like, well, what is it? He says, it's dangerous. You could get hurt. I'm like, huh. I took that as a threat. And he says, and besides, at some point, you know, because he was going back and forth with this, he says, besides, there's no pay dirt in this. You're barking up the wrong tree. There's nothing to it, which to me was contradictory. And if there's nothing to it, no pay dirt, how could this possibly be dangerous? So he refused to be direct, answer my questions. And basically I ended the conversation, or he hung up. But yeah, I took that as a threat, and have had problems with mail being opened in my private locked building in a locked mailbox, and phone problems and email problems. So yeah, I think they're aware of UFO researchers and contactees and do surveil them.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, and a couple of these questions, and forgive me for the people who have asked the questions, but I think Preston's already touched on this one from Space Cadet Lottie. What's your opinion on the government's attempt at disclosure? I think we touched on that earlier on in the show, Space Cadet Lottie, so I think we'll move on from that. Alison Buttle, same thing again. Preston, have you experienced Men in Black in particular? Well, that's kind of what you've just been asserting to, isn't it, Preston? But if you want to talk about that.
Not personally a whole lot. I mean, I've been at conventions where guys dressed up in full-on suits and shiny sunglasses and slicked back hair and ties who just ooze like a CIA sort of persona. Start asking me, oh, what case are you working on now? Sort of thing. And one guy was talking about the Topanga Canyon wave of sightings. And there was one of these guys in the audience who started to heckle me and tried to really, cause a disruption. And I kind of perceived him as being one of these government goon folks. I haven't encountered the traditional Men in Black, with disappearing black Cadillacs. And honestly, I've only interviewed maybe a couple of people who've had that. I know this is part of the UFO experience for some people, particularly if they have hard physical evidence. I did interview one guy who was a Marine who did have what he believed was a Men in Black encounter. But generally, no, I haven't had a whole lot of that.
What would it take, Preston, to put you off pursuing the case?
Nothing. There's not, I'm not afraid of dying. I believe in life after death. Very early on, I'm incensed with how this is being handled within our government. I think, I don't want to say nothing. I don't want to put myself out there to the point where, but no. Well, I am willing to go all the way with this. I don't care if you threaten me, that's just gonna, after that guy called me up and basically threatened me, I was flattered. And that may be foolish, but
if you touched on the truth, if you got really close to the truth then, and somebody from officialdom came to you and said, we'll tell you everything that you're pursuing, we'll give you the truth of everything you're pursuing, but you must never speak about it, would you do that?
I'd say goodbye. Nice knowing you, but I have zero interest in. I don't trust our governments. They're liars.
No. Well, you wouldn't sell out. That's what I'm saying. No way, would you?
No.
Brilliant. Well, we'll move to Les and see if he's got some more
I've
questions.
got a question from Outer Limits magazine, and the Bams. It's more to do with your story, Paul, about the Bamson Drain. The Bamson Drain was less than 10 yards away from my home in 1970. I would love to have the full date of this event.
Yeah, so would I, Chris. I knew you'd be interested when and funnily enough, because we've not spoke for a few months and you rang me tonight to pass on your regards to Preston. And I knew you would be interested. Obviously, Barmston Drain is a few yards from your home, Chris, or was, but we do realise that it runs for miles and miles and miles. So locationally, it's not forced to have been next to your home. I know you know that, but it's one I'm pursuing, Chris, because I'm fascinated. It ties in with anything that ties in with 1970 and a case that people just want to go to sleep. And I'm not going to let that case go to sleep. I will pursue. And it stands on its own. It's a fabulous case anyway. So I'll fill you in with a bit of information. Yeah.
Okay, I got a question from Terry Brown. Preston, what are your thoughts on the missing people in the national parks?
Thanks, Terry. I did actually talk to David Paulides, who is one of the primary researchers of this sort of thing very early on, before he became as well known and certainly as he is today. And I wonder about it. I think there are probably a number of things going on here because, people do get out in the wilderness and fall off a cliff or wander into the woods and they're never seen from again. And there's nothing that I would say is supernatural or, weird about it. But the fact that there are so many cases is definitely raising a lot of eyebrows. I think some of these might be attributable to various causes, such as, trafficking, honestly, our own government doing awful things to people, whether it's genetic experimentation or just plain out human trafficking. Some of these people are attributing to Bigfoot. I don't know. I don't want to rule that completely out, but I don't know that that would be a huge factor here. I will say that it's entirely possible some of these people are being taken on board UFOs, but again, we don't have super strong evidence linking that in terms of people seeing UFO activity where these people are disappearing from. This is a real mystery. People talk about people disappearing, time slips or what have you. I think there's something going on. People talk about reptilians. I have a few reptilian reports. And if there's any hostility towards some of these beings, I'm not sure I would call them even extraterrestrials so much as crypto-terrestrials, meaning because it's, the buzz is that they are from Earth and have been here for a long time. So it could be some of them are victims of malevolent or hungry reptilians. I don't know. I suspect there are various causes going on here. I think some of it is a little overblown in some cases, but there's enough where I think this definitely needs looking into, particularly in certain areas where the levels of missing persons is far too high to be attributable to simply becoming lost in the wilderness. Again, not my area of research. I've looked into it, and boy, oh boy, it's interesting. I would really like to know.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm just keeping an eye on the clock here, guys. With about 6 minutes to
go.
A few questions to try and get through. I apologise in advance if I don't get through all the questions. But because you asked some of the most brilliant questions for our guests, then I've got to plod on a little bit here. No name to this one, Preston, but I don't think there is anyway. World War II ? Fighter plane appeared in mist right above Long Beach Airport. Would Preston consider that a UFO or perhaps a time blip?
I'm not aware of that case. I've heard of similar cases over the Bermuda Triangle and did receive a first-hand case of something along those lines from a gentleman who claimed to have first-hand information of a time slip type thing. I don't know. I think it's possible. I do know that there are cases where people had seen what they thought was a plane or a helicopter, which turned out to be sort of in disguise, and it was a UFO, which basically, I think their perception was altered. I'm not sure the UFO itself was transmogrifying. Hard to say. I don't have a whole lot of cases like that, so it's really hard for me to speak to. But yeah, I think there's something to that because there's a lot of ghost cases that do sort of move along those lines as well. People will see homes, whole landscapes that are from the past. Perhaps there is something going on with time slips, residual hauntings. It's not just active spirits. Hauntings take on different forms. So it could be something along those lines in terms of an explanation.
Okay, thank you.
Space Cadet Lottie question. What does Preston think about the Stardust Ranch encounters with John Edmonds and his wife?
Yeah, I haven't visited that place. I did look into the book. There are other ranches like that. Blind Frog Ranch has a TV show about it, and of course the Skinwalker Ranch. These are areas where there appears to be high levels of activity for whatever reason, which runs the spectrum of UFOs and cryptozoology and paranormal activity. I'm not sure what to make of them, honestly. I really don't know. I will say that in some UFO hotspots, like Topanga Canyon or the San Luis Valley, it's not just UFOs. There are cryptozoological creatures there, religious miracles, ghostly activity. So maybe there's something about these areas, the magnetic field, I don't know, I'm just pure spitballing here, that allows a variety of activity to manifest. Something is happening. It's very strange. I don't know quite what to make of it. It could be the people themselves who are drawing this in. Could be the location. I really don't know.
Location.
Yeah, but it's certainly very interesting.
I'm just going to try and, with 1 minute to go on the clock, I'm going to try and get this question in from Chris Evers at Outer Limits magazine. Preston, you are known as a UFO and ghost investigator. Out of both, which gives you the most enjoyment, and what cases representing both subjects do you believe are the most convincing in 60 seconds? Preston.
That's something impossible to answer, but thanks, Chris. I enjoy both. I think both are equally important. I'm probably more of a UFO guy than a ghost guy, but I do think they're related. There was a case in Van Nuys where I was investigating a horrific haunting, which would I probably classify as demonic, perhaps, but they did have a UFO come right down at the tail end of this haunting, which showed a weird relationship there. But yeah, I think they are connected to some degree. I'm not going to say that one is dependent on the other, because I don't think that's the case, but I'm absolutely interested in both.
It's fabulous. Preston, it's just absolutely flown. I mean, I had a pile of questions for you, seriously, and when we speak to you, we don't need them. I don't even know why I bothered, to be honest, because you're just a wealth of knowledge, and what you've got to say. Not everybody will agree, but I think there's an element of good reasoning in everything that you've spoke about today. And for myself, thank you very much for being last guest of the year, and I'll hand it over to Les. Preston, thank you, and everybody else that's contributed.
Thank you.
Well, there we have it, folks. Another great show for a Thursday night. The last one, as Paul says, this year. We will be back. I think there's a show going out on is it the 27th, Paul?
Yeah.
Of December, a pre-recorded show, so that's something to look forward to. A great interview that Paul did with somebody from Australia with a great account. And the week after that is we've got a little bit of time off, a week off there. There might be something posted then, but we will be back the middle of January with a new guest. I've got to say thanks to Preston and Paul for tonight's show, and I've got to wish you all a Merry Christmas and good night from the Truth Proof team.